It was one of those chilly November evenings when the world feels quiet and everything seems normal, until it isn't. I had stopped by my parents' house after work to drop off a few things for Thanksgiving dinner. I wasn't supposed to stay long, just wanted to help out and leave. But as I walked up to the porch, I noticed the front door was slightly open, and I could hear laughter coming from the dining room. My name was mentioned, and something in the tone made me stop. I stood there for a moment, unsure if I should knock or just walk in. Then I heard my mother's voice, sharp and mocking. "We'll make sure she knows she's not better than anyone here," she said. My stomach turned. My sister Emily laughed, that fake little laugh she always did when she was trying to sound charming. "Oh, I've got stories," she said. "I'll tell everyone how she begged her boss for a promotion, how she pretends to have it all together." Then my father added, "Maybe that'll humble her a bit." I felt frozen. They were talking about me, not strangers, not coworkers, but my own family. I could hear my aunt saying, "It's about time someone reminded her where she came from." They were actually planning to embarrass me in front of everyone at Thanksgiving. Every laugh, every cruel comment felt like a knife. I wanted to walk in and scream, but I couldn't move. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely breathe. I slowly stepped back, afraid they might see me. My car was parked down the street, so I walked quietly until I was far enough away to run. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what I'd just heard. For years, I had worked hard, trying to make my family proud. I thought my success made them happy. I had no idea it made them jealous. I thought about every time Emily made a joke about me being single, every time my mom dismissed my accomplishments as luck, every time my dad avoided talking about my career because it made him uncomfortable. It all made sense now. They didn't want to celebrate me. They wanted to tear me down. The drive home felt endless. The city lights blurred as tears rolled down my face. I kept asking myself what I did wrong, but deep down I knew this wasn't about me. It was about them, their insecurities, their resentment. Still, it hurt more than I could ever explain. When I got home, I sat in the dark for a long time, replaying every word I'd heard. At first, I wanted to cancel Thanksgiving altogether, make an excuse, avoid the pain. But then a calm sort of strength settled in. They wanted to embarrass me. They wanted me to feel small. I decided I wouldn't give. S-faction. I'd still go to Thanksgiving, but this time I'd be ready. Melissa Grant had always been the one who followed the rules. She was the kind of daughter who remembered birthdays, sent thank you cards, and called her parents every Sunday without fail. At 32, she had built a quiet, stable life for herself. A good job as a marketing director, a small circle of real friends, and just recently, her first home. To her, it felt like a milestone worth celebrating. But in her family, success came with a price. Her younger sister, Emily, had always been the center of attention. Growing up, Emily could do no wrong. She was charming, funny, and could make their parents laugh even when she messed up badly. When Emily failed a college class, it was because the professor didn't understand her. When Melissa graduated with honors, it was brushed off as, "That's what she's supposed to do." The difference was clear early on. Melissa worked for everything, and Emily was handed everything. Their parents, Robert and Elaine, didn't mean to be cruel, or at least that's what Melissa used to tell herself. But as the years went by, the favoritism became impossible to ignore. Her mother often compared them, saying things like, "Emily just has that spark you never had," or, "You're doing fine, but Emily brings people together." Her father wasn't much better. He'd listened to Emily's stories for hours, but gave Melissa's news about a work promotion no more than a passing, "That's nice." Melissa never fought back. She thought keeping the peace was better than causing drama. But every small slight added up. She noticed how her parents always invited Emily's friends to family events, but never bothered with hers. She noticed how Emily borrowed money and never paid it back, yet somehow still received expensive gifts, because she needed the encouragement. Meanwhile, Melissa's achievements were treated as obligations, never reasons for pride. Buying her house had been the last straw. When she shared the news, her mom's first response wasn't congratulations. It was, "Don't you think it's a bit much for someone single?" Her dad just said, "Hope you can keep up with the mortgage." And Emily, of course, had smirked and said, "Wow, I guess you finally have something to show off." It stung, but Melissa smiled through it like always. As Thanksgiving approached, the tension in the air grew. The dinner was supposed to be a warm family gathering, but Melissa could already sense something was off. Her parents were unusually distant on the phone, and Emily's tone carried that same smug energy Melissa had learned to recognize. The one that meant trouble was coming. Still, Melissa tried to stay optimistic. She told herself it was just family stress, that she was imagining things. But deep down, a quiet unease settled in her chest. Something told her that this Thanksgiving wasn't going to be like the others. Something told her that the cracks in her family, the ones she had ignored for years, were about to break wide open.
It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Melissa decided to stop by her parents' house. She had picked up a few groceries for them, some of her mom's favorite apples and her dad's preferred coffee beans. It was something she often did just to help out. When she pulled into the driveway, she saw both their cars there and Emily's little blue sedan parked on the side. Melissa smiled for a moment, thinking maybe she'd walk into a cheerful family afternoon. But what she walked into instead was something she'd never forget. The front door was unlocked, so she pushed it open and stepped inside. From the hallway, she could already hear laughter coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the usual kind. It had an edge to it, sharp and mean. She froze when she heard her name. "I swear." Emily's voice carried through the room, light and mocking. Melissa thinks she's some kind of success story now. A house? Alone? Who does she think she's impressing? Her mother's voice followed, smooth but full of sarcasm.
Exactly.
She's been walking around like she's above everyone just because she can afford a mortgage. She needs a reality check. Maybe at dinner, we can remind her she's still the same awkward little girl who used to cry when things didn't go her way. Melissa stood still, her heart pounding. Her first instinct was to step away, but her feet wouldn't move. She leaned slightly closer, just enough to hear them clearly. Her father joined in, chuckling. "Let's not make it too harsh," he said, though his tone was amused. "Just a few stories from her teenage years should do the trick. Keep her humble." "Oh, I've got plenty," Emily said eagerly. "Remember the time she wrote that love letter to her math tutor? Or when she tripped during her school presentation and blamed the stage lights?" They all laughed, her parents, her sister, even her aunt, who must have been visiting too. Melissa's face burned. Each word hit like a slap. They weren't just making jokes, they were planning it, like it was some kind of game. Her own family, the people she had trusted the most, were getting ready to humiliate her in front of relatives and guests. Then came the worst part. Her mother said, "She's forgotten her place. She needs to be reminded she's not better than us." Melissa's breath caught in her throat. That sentence echoed in her head, over and over. Not better than us. As if her hard work, her sacrifices, her independence, all of it, were something to punish her for. Her vision blurred with tears, but she forced herself to stay silent. Slowly, she backed away from the doorway, making sure they didn't see her. Her hands were trembling as she reached for the doorknob. The laughter from the kitchen followed her out of the house, each sound cutting deeper. By the time she got to her car, she could barely breathe. The groceries slipped from her hands, rolling across the driveway. She didn't bother picking them up. She got into the car, shut the door, and sat there in shock. It felt like something inside her had broken, something that could never be repaired. As she drove away, the betrayal sank in. Her family wasn't just unkind. They were cruel. And the people she had tried to please her whole life had never really loved her, not for who she was. Melissa drove home in complete silence. The sound of the tires on the road was the only thing filling the air. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, and her eyes blurred with tears she couldn't stop. She felt hollow, like all the air had been sucked out of her chest. Every laugh, every cruel word she'd overheard replayed in her mind over and over again, each one cutting deeper than the last. For years, she had convinced herself that her family loved her, just in their own way. She had brushed off their comments, told herself they didn't mean it, that she was being too sensitive. But now, everything was clear. All those little jokes about her being too serious, all the dismissive tones when she talked about her work, all the times they left her out of plans, they weren't harmless. They were deliberate. As she turned onto her street, her body felt heavy, like she was dragging the weight of years behind her. She parked outside her house and sat there in the dark, unable to move. The home she had been so proud of now felt too quiet, too empty. She leaned her forehead against the steering wheel and cried softly, letting it all out, the disappointment, the anger, the heartbreak. When she finally walked inside, she didn't turn on the lights. The glow from the street lamps outside gave the living room a faint orange hue. She sank onto the couch and just sat there, staring at nothing. She thought about how hard she had worked to make them proud. Every decision, every late night, every moment of sacrifice, it was all done hoping they would finally see her. But instead, they were plotting to humiliate her. Her mind replayed her mother's voice. She needs to be reminded she's not better than us. That sentence stuck like a splinter in her heart. She realized that no matter what she did, they would never see her as their equal because they didn't want to. Her success had become their resentment. For a long while, she just sat in silence, feeling the hurt settle deep inside her. She thought about not going to Thanksgiving, about disappearing from their lives completely. It would be easier to avoid them, to stay in her own peaceful space and pretend they didn't exist. But then another thought crept in, quiet but firm. Why should she hide? Why should she be the one to run away when she had done nothing wrong? Melissa wiped her tears, took a deep breath, and sat up straighter. For the first time, she wasn't just sad. She was angry, but in a calm, focused way. They thought they could tear her down, but they underestimated her. She wasn't going to argue or yell or stoop to their level.
No.
She would walk into that dinner with her head high, prepared for whatever they tried to throw at her. Something inside her shifted that night. She was done being the quiet, forgiving daughter. This time, she wasn't going to stay silent.
The next morning, Melissa woke up feeling drained but clear-headed. The sadness from the night before had turned into a quiet determination. She wasn't going to yell or cry or play the victim. That wasn't her style. If her family wanted to make her the target, she would let them. But this time, she would make sure the truth spoke louder than their cruelty. For the first time in years, she began thinking back through everything she had done for them. She remembered the money she had lent her parents when her dad lost his job, money she never asked to be repaid. She remembered paying off part of Emily's college tuition after her sister's scholarship fell through, even though no one ever thanked her. She remembered all the times she stepped in to help, only to be brushed aside as if her support didn't matter. Melissa decided to gather proof, not to start a fight, but to make sure no one could twist her words later. She opened her laptop and scrolled through her old bank records. There they were, transfers labeled Help for Dad, Emily's last payment, and Mom's medical bills. Thousands of dollars, sent over the years without question. She organized everything neatly in a folder, printing copies just in case. Each line on the statement reminded her of the love and trust she had given freely, and how easily it had been betrayed. Next, she went through her messages. There were dozens from her mother, asking for favors and emotional support, followed by long gaps of silence whenever Melissa needed help herself. There were texts from Emily, dripping with fake sweetness, the kind of messages that always ended with a request for money or a favor. She saved screenshots of the worst ones, not out of spite, but to remind herself she wasn't imagining things. Over the next few days, she kept busy, but her mind stayed focused. She planned every detail of how she would carry herself at Thanksgiving. No shouting, no tears, no desperation. Just calm truth. If they tried to humiliate her, she would let them, and then she would show everyone who the real Melissa was. She even thought about what she'd wear, something simple but confident, nothing that screamed for attention. She wanted her composure to speak for her. On the surface, she'd be the same quiet daughter they expected. But underneath, she would be steady, prepared, and unshakable. Late one night, sitting on her couch with the printed papers beside her, she let out a slow breath. She realized this wasn't just about Thanksgiving anymore. It was about finally standing up for herself, not to hurt them, but to free herself. They wanted to put her in her place. They were about to learn that she had already found it, and it didn't belong under anyone's shadow. Thanksgiving Day arrived cold and gray, with the kind of wind that hinted at early snow. Melissa woke up early, got dressed carefully, and stood in front of the mirror for a moment before leaving. Her reflection looked calm, steady. She wasn't nervous anymore. She felt ready. The folder of documents she had prepared was tucked neatly inside her bag, though she hoped she wouldn't need to use it. She took a deep breath, grabbed the pumpkin pie she had baked, and drove to her parents' house. When she arrived, the driveway was already full. Relatives she hadn't seen in months were there, their voices echoing with laughter from inside. She pasted on a polite smile as she stepped through the door. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon filled the air. Her mother greeted her with a wide, practiced smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Melissa, you made it. We weren't sure you'd come," she said, pretending to be surprised. Her father came over next, patting her shoulder like he was greeting a distant coworker, not his own daughter. "Glad you're here," he said. Emily appeared behind them, looking effortlessly perfect in her cream sweater and gold earrings. "Hey, sis," she said sweetly, giving Melissa a quick hug. "Wow, you actually baked something? Look at you being domestic." Her tone was playful, but the edge was there, hidden under the smile. Melissa didn't flinch. She just smiled back. "Yeah, I thought I'd try something different this year," she said softly, setting the pie down on the counter. The table was already set, everything picture perfect. She took a seat quietly and watched as everyone fell into their roles. Her parents laughing too loudly, Emily chatting about her new opportunities, her aunt gossiping about relatives who weren't there. It was all so familiar, almost like a performance they'd rehearsed. When dinner finally began, Melissa joined in small talk, answering questions politely and keeping her tone even. For a while, things went smoothly. Then it started, the remarks she had been expecting. Emily was the first. "So, Melissa," she began with a grin. "How's life in that big empty house of yours? Must get lonely, huh?" Her mother laughed lightly. "She's too independent for her own good," Elaine said. "Always has been. Never needed anyone." Her father chuckled, adding, "Well, at least she can take care of herself. That's something, right?" The laughter around the table was light and casual, but Melissa could feel every word like a tiny cut. Her cheeks warmed, but she kept her expression calm, her posture straight. She just smiled politely and took a sip of her water. "It's peaceful," she said simply. "I like the quiet." Emily rolled her eyes. "Of course you do," she said under her breath. Melissa didn't respond. She wasn't going to give them the reaction they wanted. As the meal went on, the pattern continued. Subtle insults disguised as jokes, small digs slipped into conversations. But Melissa stayed composed. Every cruel comment only made her resolve stronger. She waited patiently, watching, listening, letting them dig themselves deeper. Because she knew something they didn't. The night wasn't over, and she wasn't leaving quietly this time. The dinner had stretched on for over an hour, and the tension at the table was thick enough to feel in the air. Melissa stayed quiet, keeping her polite smile in place while her family carried on as if everything were perfect. The table was full of chatter, Emily talking about her new job, their parents bragging about her like she was the family's biggest success. Melissa nodded when needed, keeping her emotions tightly controlled. Then, just as dessert was being served, Emily cleared her throat dramatically. "I actually have some exciting news," she said, looking around the table with that smug sparkle in her eyes. Everyone turned to her. "Ryan and I are engaged." She held out her hand, showing off a sparkling ring. Her mother gasped, covering her mouth, and her father beamed with pride. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," Elaine said, jumping up to hug her. The room filled with excitement. Everyone started talking at once, asking about the proposal, the wedding date, the plans. Melissa smiled politely and clapped her hands softly. "Congratulations, Emily," she said. "I'm happy for you." Emily turned toward her with that familiar, superior smile. "Thanks, sis," she said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. Then she added, almost too casually, "At least someone in the family can keep a relationship going, right?" A few relatives laughed awkwardly. Her father chuckled and said, Now, but he didn't really mean it." The jab hung in the air. Melissa looked at her sister, not angry, not hurt, just calm. She had expected something like this. She placed her napkin gently on the table and straightened her posture. "Actually," she said softly, her voice steady, "there's something I'd like to share too." The room quieted. Her family turned to look at her, expecting something small or insignificant. Melissa reached into her bag, took out her phone, and placed it on the table. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a moment, and then she pressed play. At first, there was confusion. Then, through the small speaker, familiar voices filled the room. Laughter, conversation, and then her mother's voice. "We'll make sure she knows she's not better than anyone here." The laughter stopped instantly. Melissa sat back, watching their faces change. Her mother went pale, her father froze, and Emily's fake smile slowly vanished. Her aunt looked around, wide-eyed, realizing exactly what she was hearing. The recording continued. Emily's voice came next. "Oh, I've got stories. I'll tell everyone how she begged her boss for a promotion." Then her father's laughter followed. The sound filled the dining room, echoing against the walls, and no one dared to move. Melissa let it play for a few more seconds, just enough to make the point clear, then stopped it. The silence afterward was deafening. She looked at each of them, calm and expressionless. "That was from last week," she said quietly, "when I came by to drop off groceries." Her mother opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her father stared at the table. Emily's face had gone red. The other guests didn't know where to look. The perfect image her family had built all evening shattered in seconds. Melissa didn't raise her voice. She didn't gloat or smile. She simply said, "You wanted to remind me I'm not better than you. But you've just reminded everyone who you really are." No one dared to respond. The only sound left in the room was the faint hum of the heater and the ticking of the dining room clock. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air in the dining room felt heavy. Melissa sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, while her family stared at her like they didn't recognize her anymore. Her father, Robert, was the first to move. He forced a small laugh, trying to ease the tension. "Come on now," he said lightly. "You know we were just joking around. Families tease each other all the time." Melissa looked at him calmly. "That wasn't teasing," she said. "That was cruelty." Her tone was steady but sharp enough to silence him. Her mother, Elaine, looked pale, her eyes darting between everyone at the table. "Melissa, you have to understand, we didn't mean for it to sound that way," she stammered. "You've just been so distant lately, and—" Melissa cut her off quietly. "Distant? I've been working, helping, supporting all of you. And for what? So you could laugh behind my back." Emily's voice broke through next, shaky but defensive. "Okay, maybe we said some things we shouldn't have, but you always act like you're better than everyone. You make us feel small." Melissa tilted her head slightly, studying her sister. "I don't make you feel small, Emily. You do that to yourself. I've never thrown my success in your face. I've only tried to help you." She reached into her bag and pulled out the folder she had prepared, sliding it across the table. "Here," she said. "These are all the times I've helped you. The tuition payments, the loans, the bills I covered when you said you couldn't afford them." Emily blinked, her mouth opening and closing without sound. The relatives at the table leaned forward, whispering among themselves. Melissa turned to her parents next. "And these," she said, pulling out a few more papers, "are the transfers I made when Dad lost his job. Thousands of dollars. No questions asked. Because I thought that's what family did for each other." Elaine's hands shook as she stared at the papers. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat, trying to avoid her eyes. "We didn't ask you to do that," he muttered, his voice low. Melissa met his gaze. "No, you didn't. But I did it anyway because I cared. Because I wanted to help. And still, you sat there and planned how to humiliate me." The room was silent except for the faint clinking of a fork someone nervously set down. Even their grandmother, who had always taken Emily's side, sat back in her chair with a hard expression. She looked at each of them, Robert, Elaine, and Emily, with disappointment written all over her face. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was calm but cold. "You should be ashamed," she said. "All of you. I've watched you treat Melissa like an outsider for years, and now I see how deep it runs." No one dared to respond. Emily looked like she wanted to cry. Robert stared at his plate. Elaine pressed a napkin to her mouth, as if trying to hide her trembling lips. Melissa stood up slowly. "I didn't come here to embarrass anyone," she said. "I came here to stop letting you embarrass me." She looked around the table one last time, her eyes steady. "I'm done trying to earn a place in this family. You made it clear I never really had one." And with that, she turned and walked out, leaving behind a table full of silent, guilty faces. The moment Melissa left the dining room, everything fell apart. Chairs scraped against the floor as Emily stood up suddenly, her face red with anger. "She's ruined everything," she shouted, grabbing her purse. "I'm not staying here another minute." Without waiting for anyone to stop her, she stormed out, the door slamming behind her so hard that the dishes on the table rattled. Elaine burst into tears, her head falling into her hands. "How did it come to this?" she sobbed. "It was supposed to be a nice family dinner." Her voice trembled with guilt and confusion. Robert tried to comfort her, but his own face was pale. He looked shaken, as if he had finally seen something he had ignored for too long. He stood up and looked toward the door where Melissa had left. "I need to talk to her," he said quietly. But by the time he stepped outside, her car was already gone. The taillights disappeared into the dark street, leaving him standing there in the cold, alone. Inside, Elaine kept crying, mumbling about how she hadn't meant for things to get so bad. The other relatives avoided eye contact, silently gathering their coats and leaving one by one. The warmth and laughter that had filled the house earlier were gone, replaced by a heavy silence that no one dared to break. When Melissa got home, she sat in her car for a few minutes before going inside. Her hands were still trembling, but she wasn't crying. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, peace. It was strange and quiet, but it felt right. She walked into her house, took off her coat, and looked around. For the first time, her home didn't feel empty. It felt like hers, a place where she didn't have to prove herself to anyone. The next morning, her phone buzzed nonstop. Missed calls, voicemails, messages, all from her parents. Elaine's messages were long and emotional, full of apologies and excuses. Robert's were shorter, more serious, asking to talk when she was ready. But Melissa didn't respond. She sat on her couch, phone in hand, and then slowly pressed the block button on Emily's number. She muted her parents' calls and put the phone face down. In the days that followed, word spread quickly through the extended family. Cousins and aunts began calling, some to gossip, others to quietly tell her they were proud of her for standing up for herself. One of her uncles even said, "It's about time someone told them the truth." Back at her parents' house, the tension lingered. Elaine refused to host any more family dinners, and Robert barely spoke. Emily stopped coming around, embarrassed by what had happened. The once perfect image of their happy family had cracked wide open, and everyone could see what was underneath. Melissa didn't look back. She went to work, met friends for coffee, and started decorating her house for the holidays. She didn't feel guilty, she felt free. She finally understood that walking away didn't mean giving up on family. It meant choosing peace over pain. And as she stood by her window that evening, watching the lights glow across the street, she smiled softly to herself. For the first time, she felt like she truly belonged to her own life. A month passed after that painful Thanksgiving, and life began to settle into a new rhythm for Melissa. December came quickly, and while the rest of the world was decorating trees and planning family dinners, she felt something new calm. There was no dread hanging over her, no fake smiles to prepare for. Her house felt warm and peaceful, and for the first time, she was spending Christmas exactly how she wanted. Her best friend, Laura, had invited her to spend the holidays with her family. At first, Melissa hesitated. She didn't want to intrude or feel like a guest, but Laura insisted. "You're family to us," she said, and something about the way she said it made Melissa's heart soften. On Christmas Eve, she arrived at Laura's house with a few gifts and a tray of homemade cookies. The moment she stepped inside, laughter, warmth, and the smell of cinnamon filled the air. Laura's parents welcomed her with open arms, her little nieces ran up to hug her, and even the family dog wagged its tail at her feet. It wasn't a fancy dinner or a perfect scene, but it was real. Everyone talked, listened, and laughed together. When Laura's father said grace before dinner, he added, "And thank you for friends who become family," and everyone smiled at Melissa. She felt tears rise in her eyes but blinked them away. For the first time in years, she felt like she truly belonged. As the night went on, they shared stories, exchanged small gifts, and took pictures by the Christmas tree. There were no insults, no backhanded comments, no tension. Just love. Melissa realized that she didn't miss her old family's approval. Not even a little. She had spent years trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Now she finally understood that respect and kindness come from the heart, not obligation. A few days after Christmas, she came home to find an envelope in her mailbox. The handwriting was familiar, her father's. She stood there for a long moment before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Robert's words were shaky and filled with regret. He apologized for not standing up for her, for letting Emily's manipulation divide the family, and for failing to see how much she had given. He wrote that the house felt empty without her, and that he hoped someday she could forgive them. Melissa read the letter twice. Then she folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. She didn't feel anger anymore, just peace. She knew she didn't need to respond. The closure she once craved had already come from within. She had forgiven them in her heart, but she didn't need to reopen the door that had finally closed. That night, she sat by her fireplace, a cup of tea in her hands, soft music playing in the background. Her Christmas lights glowed gently against the walls. She smiled, thinking about how far she had come, from a woman desperate for approval to one who finally knew her worth. That Thanksgiving had started with betrayal and heartbreak, but it ended with something far greater: freedom. Melissa realized that sometimes, family isn't about who shares your blood. It's about who stands beside you when the world turns cold. And as she sat there surrounded by peace and quiet, she knew she had finally found hers.